guys, welcome Off the Path Learning. My name is Lisa. Now you may or may not recognize what's behind me here. If you do, you'll have a hint as to what's coming up in this video. So early spring is upon us and the sap has started flowing in the maple trees. And so in this video, I want to talk about all things maple. Specifically, I'll be talking about all things sugar maple, Acer saccharum. So in this video, we'll quickly look at how to identify a maple tree, and we'll look at how you can differentiate a sugar maple from other maples. We'll look at the traditional indigenous use of the maple tree. We'll look at the edible parts of the maple tree, so all the different parts you can consume. We'll look at the medicinal benefits of those parts. And last but not least, we'll go through the entire process of collecting the sap and further boiling it into hopefully some maple syrup. Let's get into it.
Quand ça va bien, que c'est un de ces matins. Quand ça va bien, que c'est un de ces matins. Quand ça va bien, que tu travailles pas demain. Quand ça va bien. Les œufs parfaits dans ton couvert rendent un jaloux de poussin. Celle qui te les serre, les yeux verts, qui ferait blêmir un daltonien. T'aimes bien ça, comment qu'est habillé, juste en bobette, puis en tablier. T'es là, tu frettes sur ta chaise, un peu comme le bacon dans le poêle. Le café que t'achemines sans équivoque, c'est sûr, il est double cheminot. Le soleil brille dans mon code saucisse, mon horoscope, je suis en business. Quand ça va bien, que c'est un de ces matins. Quand ça va bien, que c'est un de ces matins. Quand ça va bien, que tu travailles pas demain. Quand ça va bien. Ça a l'air qu'hier t'étais drôle, que t'étais tout un numéro. Pas de scandale en sortie de zone, la bille dépasse pas 2-0, pas de côte qui saigne, les capotes sont pleines. Dans ton lit, c'est pas mistropique, mais c'est pas non plus un freak show de cirque loin de là. M'en va y faire des crêpes au chocolat avec un bon café chaud. Bélez et double cheminot. C'est des matins de main que t'as le goût de taper des mains, de petit mal de rein, des coups de bassin, ouais, t'as petit mal de tête. Pas rien qu'une bière, un café bien dosé pour le replacer. Rien que ça! Oh ouais, monsieur! Leclerc disait que pour tuer un homme, fallait l'arrêter de travailler. Non, mais de quel homme il parlait? Sûrement pas de moi. Si j'étais pas passé 18 ans, je risquerais pas de retourner en dedans. Je vendrais encore de la messe aux Indiens. Ça côte nord comme dans le temps, je serais encore en train de vendre du weed en Gaspésie. Le double du prix, j'aurais pas quitté mes postes de traite. Puis je serais sûrement sur le bord de la retraite. C'est quand ça va bien, que c'est un de ces matins. Quand ça va bien, que c'est un de ces matins. Quand ça va bien, que tu travailles pas demain. Quand ça va bien, t'es pas trop vert, mais t'es pas trop douette. Ta gorge sec comme un berbère dans le désert qui crie Inch'Allah, faudrait qu'il mouille sur le Sahara. T'as juste le bon pH, je tiens qu'à ta patrie. Le shooter d'une cuillerée de petite vache, t'es prête à te caler ben plein de bière. T'as juste le bon pH, je tiens qu'à ta patrie. T'as le sourire étampé d'en face, il est même pas encore copté. Y'a des matins même que t'as le goût de taper des mains. Petit mal de rein, c'est à cause des coups de bassin. Ouais, t'as un petit mal de tête qui prend rien qu'une bière, un café bien tossé pour le replacer. Rien que ça! Ouais, monsieur! Ah ouais, par là! C'est quand ça va bien, c'est un de ces matins. Quand ça va bien, que c'est un de ces matins. Quand ça va bien, que tu travailles pas demain. Quand ça va bien. c'est un de ces matins, quand ça va bien, que c'est un de ces matins, quand ça va bien, que tu travailles pour demain, quand ça va bien, quand ça va bien, que c'est un de ces matins.
A big part of the reason why foraging resonates with me is that it brings my mind back to a childlike state. I'm not one of those lucky people that grew up foraging all of their lives. I'm only getting into it now, and so I've got a lot to make up for. But I realize in foraging now, I get these flashbacks of memories of interacting with these plants as a child. Maple is one of those plants. I remember when I was growing up in the suburbs, we had a tiny front lawn and we had two pretty sizable maples in the front. I think they were red maples. And I remember being fascinated by the bark, you know, the big furrowed, like peeling bark. And I remember it was so satisfying to peel off the dead bark. And I also remember those helicopters in the fall. And those are actually the fruits called saccharum, but back when I was a kid, we called them helicopters. And I remember so vividly interacting with it, breaking the husk apart, taking the green seed out, breaking it in two, nibbling on it a bit. And it actually turns out that those seeds are edible and that the bark and the seeds are key identifying characteristics of the maple. So, how do you identify a maple? Well, those things that were fascinating to me as a child, and I suspect to you also, are the things you need to look out for to identify a maple tree. The deeply furrowed bark in older specimens. In younger specimens, the bark will be smoother. Those helicopters or the samaras are fruits of the tree from a successfully pollinated female flower, and those will fall in the fall, and so you can identify it that way. The leaves of maples are always lobed, usually about 5 lobes, but it can vary from 3 to 9. But what sets the sugar maple apart from other maples is that the notches in between the lobes are curved, and that's a key identifying characteristic. Another helpful trick to identify the maple is in the fall it'll have such a beautiful foliage. It's quite striking, and the colors vary from pink, orange, yellow, red. It's so beautiful. So sugar maples are native to the hardwood forests of eastern North America. They can live up to 200 years old. Their wood is really hard and heavy and has this beautiful pale color. And it's been used for centuries for things like furniture, flooring, and back in the day it was even used for train tracks. The indigenous people used its wood to make some of their weapons, but their use of maple didn't stop there. Hey, sweetie. A decoction of the inner bark was used for various things, including colds and coughs. It was used as a blood purifier, it was used to treat diarrhea, and it was used as a diuretic and expectorant to help move the phlegm out of the body. A decoction of the inner bark was also used externally to treat conjunctivitis, which is also known as pink eye, and other eye issues. And in times of famine, the inner bark was dried and used as a flour. The young branches and seeds were used for their nutritional benefits. An infusion of the leaves was used for detoxification. Now, of course, maple syrup was made from the sap, and they showed the early settlers how to use the wood ash from maple to improve the quality of their soil, given that the ash from maple is really rich in potassium. So how can you incorporate this amazing tree into your life? Well, let's look at the edible parts. So the young leaves that come out of the winter buds in the spring are edible. You can eat them either raw or cooked. The inner bark can be collected and used as a food. You can either use it in a decoction or you can dry it, powder it, and mix it with a flour. In winter, you can harvest the twigs and the terminal buds to make a remineralizing and alkalizing decoction. The fruits, and more specifically the seeds, can be eaten. They can be eaten raw or cooked, and they're actually pretty high in protein, about 43%. Now, if you're interested in collecting those seeds like I am, I suggest you let Mother Nature do the hard work. Wait until fall when the samaras fall to the ground. Just pick them up. Make sure that the seed is nice and plump still inside of that dried husk. Make sure that it has a beautiful green color, and you can taste it while you're out in the field. If it's too bitter, because the seed does contain a lot of tannins, and so it can be bitter. If you taste it raw and it's bitter, you may choose to boil it down in a few changes of fresh water to remove some of those tannins, remove some of the bitterness. Once it's no longer bitter, you can dry out the seed for further use. You could go ahead and roast it for 5 to 10 minutes. You can dry it and then grind it down to make a flour. The possibilities are endless. A properly dried seed should last you all winter. And last but not least, the sap can be collected. Making maple syrup is not the only way to enjoy the sap of the maple tree. You can drink the sap right out of the tree as a refreshing spring tonic. It's absolutely incredible. Last year was the first year I tapped a maple, and I did not make maple syrup with it. I was so amazed by the sap that I wanted to preserve the sap just so I could drink it all winter long. I went into the store and bought these giant 40-ounce mason jars, and the sap just kept flowing. I had to keep going back to the store to buy more jugs. I kept filling my jugs up, putting them in the freezer, because if you collect sap, it stays good for about 1 week, and then after that, if you're not going to use it within a week, you should freeze it like I did. I'm happy to report that it worked really well. I would take out 1 mason jar, thaw it out in the fridge, make sure I drank it within 3-4 days, and it was absolutely delicious. I had no issues. But keep in mind that the sap of the maple can be used as a laxative, and so, you know, take it slow. If it's your first time, have like a small glass, see how you feel. If you're feeling adventurous, go for a little bit more. But just know that it's packed with nutrition, it's got tons of medicinal benefits, and so it is worth experiencing the sap. Okay, I'm out of breath. First maple water collected ever this year. Right here, it's so delicious, so refreshing. It's really cold. It's amazing. Yeah, it was an incredible process. Really cool. Really happy that this tree gave up some of its nutrients that it's sending to its leaves for me and my family. You can also choose to boil down the sap just a little bit, but not go fully into syrup, and that's also a great way to interact with maple. To be honest with you, making maple syrup can be a little tedious because, you know, at the end of the boiling process, it goes really fast. You need to be aware of your temperatures. If you want to make a beautiful, nice, clear syrup, you're going to have to filter it through a whole bunch of different kinds of filters. It can get a little complicated, but it's really not necessary. You can choose to just boil down the sap a little bit so that that sweetness really comes out, is more predominant. You get a beautiful liquid, and the sweetness just has a much greater punch than as it does when it's coming out of the tree. But on a good day with a good tree, the sap flowing out of the maple will be incredibly sweet and delicious. So my province, Quebec, is the #1 supplier of maple syrup to the world. It produces about 70% of the world's maple syrup. As you can see from the painting above me there, it's tradition here in Quebec to, in the spring, make maple syrup. There are so many Quebecers that have their own little operation. In the spring, it's very common for us to go to the sugar shack and have a traditional, like, sugar shack meal. There is a chemical compound that's found in maple syrup that is a powerful antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. It was discovered here by the researchers at the University of Laval, and they very fittingly called that chemical compound Quebecol. So let's get into the medicinal benefits of maple. Now, I spoke about the chemical compound Quebecol. That's a powerful antioxidant and anti-inflammatory, but that's not all that maple syrup has. Maple syrup has significant amounts of manganese, zinc, and vitamin B2. It also contains calcium, potassium, and magnesium. Maple syrup is said to be a liver tonic and a kidney cleanser, and it's used often in cough syrups. Overall, the medicine of maple has the following properties. So now that we've looked at a few things, we've looked at how to identify your maple, we've looked at what parts you can consume, we've looked at the medicinal benefits of those parts, let's finally get into the beautiful process of collecting sap. Now, when you're collecting sap, you're essentially collecting the stored summer energy. In the springtime, the buds open, the leaves of the tree collect the energy of the sun all summer long, and then in the fall they take that energy and they give it to the roots. They store it back into the roots. When the spring comes and the ground is thawing, that energy that was stored into the roots now comes back up through the tree to feed the buds, and the cycle continues. So how do you know when it's time to start tapping maple trees? You need nights that are below freezing, but days that are above freezing. So when you have beautiful, warm, sunny days, but the nights are still below freezing, that's when the sap is flowing, and so that's when you want to tap your trees. And in the same way, that's when you know when it's time to take out the taps. When the nights are becoming above freezing, you want to take out your taps. Once the maple sap season stops, the birch season starts. And so you can tap birch trees right after you tap maples, and you use all the same equipment. So it's a beautiful thing. Now, I want to mention here that a sugar maple is not the only maple that you can collect sap from to make maple syrup. It's just the one that's commonly associated with maple syrup because it's used a lot in commercial syrup processing because the sap has the highest sugar content. The sugar maple and black maple have the highest sugar content. They're both commercially used for syrup. To a lesser extent, silver and red maple are also used to make maple syrup, but they have apparently a sap to syrup ratio of 80:1, and the sugar maple and black maple have a sap to syrup ratio of 40:1. And so that means you're going to have to collect 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. It's going to require a lot of boiling down. In my research, honestly, I got the feeling that it doesn't really matter which kind of maple you use, as long as the sap is flowing and you know you're just making maple syrup for yourself on a small scale to enjoy, especially if it's your first time. I would not be discouraged if you don't have specifically sugar maple around you. If you, like I said, if you have sap flowing in a maple, I think it's worth tapping just to try the sap out of the tree. I think it's one of the most amazing experiences as a forager to see sap running out of a tree for the first time. And I think it's worth putting in the effort to make syrup no matter what kind of maple you have. Alright, so how do you go about tapping a maple tree? Well, first things first, the boring part. You're going to want to clean all of your equipment, and ideally you're going to want to give it a bleach bath of 20 parts water to 1 part bleach, making sure you rinse everything really well with clean water after, and then you should sterilize the equipment that's going to be going into the tree, so the drill bit and the spile. You sterilize it by boiling it in water for about 10 minutes. Next, you're going to select your tree. You're going to pick a healthy tree that's at least 40 years of age. So how can you tell if the tree is over 40 years old? Well, just pick a tree that has a diameter of at least 10 inches. And some people put multiple taps in bigger trees, but make sure that the tree is quite large, over 20 inches in diameter if you're going to do that. Once you've selected your tree, it's time to drill your hole. Now the size of the hole will depend on the kind of spile you're using. I'm using metal spiles. Plastic spiles are becoming really popular now. They might be considered a little bit better than metal spiles because they are smaller, and so when the end of the season comes and it's time to take out the spile, the tree has less work to do to heal itself. Now I know that plugging the hole versus not plugging the hole once you're done with your season is a whole area of debate. In my personal opinion, it's best to just leave the tree do its own thing. If you plug the hole, you risk making things worse, introducing bacteria to the tree. And so if you picked a healthy tree, the tree should be able to handle its own healing process. And of course, you could go pretty primitive and just use a stick to work as a spile. But I'll be using metal spiles in this video, and so for the metal spiles, you'll need a 7/16 size drill bit, and for the plastic spiles, you should have a 5/16 drill bit. You're gonna wanna make your hole about 3 feet off of the ground, keeping in mind the level of snow at the time that you're drilling the hole. So I got stuck on this last year. I drilled my hole at a nice cozy spot as I was standing in the moment, and then 4 weeks later when the sap was still flowing, I was collecting my buckets at the tip of my toes. And so keep that in mind. You want it 3 feet off of the ground, not off of the snow level. Now you want to make your hole on the sunny side of the tree, and if you're not sure where that is, the tree will help you out. Just look up and you'll see that most of the branches will probably be pointing in one general direction, and so that's the area you want to put your hole in. Typically that means in the southeast direction though. Once you start drilling your hole, you're going to go at a slight upward angle and you're going to go about 2 inches into the tree. A good indication that you selected a healthy tree is that the wood coming off of the drill bit is going to be that nice pale yellow color. If the wood comes out wet and dark brown, then your wood is rotten and you did not select a good tree. You should see the sap start flowing immediately out of the hole, and what a beautiful thing that is. So go in and tap in your spile right away. Anything works, a hammer is good. Once it gets tight, just stop. Hook your bucket, put your lid on, and that's it. You're done. You've tapped a tree. You can collect maple sap. The only thing left to do now is wait until the bucket gets full. As you're collecting your sap, you want to have it stored in a cool place. So if it's cold enough outside, that's fine. Otherwise, bring it in and put it in a refrigerator. Once you have collected the sap, it only stays good for about a week, and so you want to start boiling it down within that time frame. Otherwise, consider maybe freezing it. You can freeze the sap to do the boiling process later. Now, to quote Euell Gibbons in his book, Stalking the Wild Asparagus, "There is no need to slavishly copy my poor methods. Improvise and have fun. So there's a million ways to skin a cat. Don't get bogged down by trying to copy someone else's methods to do your maple syrup. Do what works for you. What are you drawn to? What do you have at home that you could use? It's my first time making maple syrup, and the methods I'll be using, I'll admit, are not the most efficient. The way I'm making my fire means that a lot of heat will escape, and so that means using up more firewood than I would if I made the whole system more efficient. It means it's going to take more time for my sap to boil down. The container I have my sap in is also not really the best. Ideally, you would want like the widest pan you can get, and you have the sap lining bottom about, you know, only an inch or so, and that way you get to the syrup much faster. So the way I'm going to be doing it means that I'll have to be boiling down for longer. I'm going to have to be feeding the fire. Will I be offended by the potential negative comments because everyone and their grandma has a video on how to make maple syrup and my methods are maybe not the best? Maybe, but the ultimate goal here for me is to deepen my connection with the maple tree, and that's what's important to me. And that's a connection I'll be able to share with my friends, my family, and with you guys. So I'm standing in our old sugar shack here. Back in its heyday, this sugar shack had about 700 maple trees tapped, all feeding a reservoir here that would then feed this giant boiler. It's a wood burning boiler, and so that's why I've got a huge pile of wood in the back of me. I'm not going to be using this system because honestly this is made for a very large scale operation, and because it's my first time and I'm just starting, I want to keep it really simple. I do want to take advantage of the fact that there is all this wood, so I will be doing my boiling over fire. No. You're not nice. That's not nice. So how do you know when your sap has become syrup? Once the steam coming off of the boil slows down quite a bit and you see that the level of the sap has gone down, bring the sap inside, and the best method to see when the sap has become syrup is by gauging the temperature. And so it goes off of the boiling temperature of water. Maple sap becomes syrup when it's 7 degrees Fahrenheit over the boiling temperature of water. And to know the boiling temperature of water, you need to know what elevation you're at. Now, I had no idea. I asked Lucas. He has an app on his phone. It said that we were at 500 meters elevation. And so I just went online, found a boiling point at altitude calculator, figured that over here the water boils at around 209.08 degrees Fahrenheit. So add 7 to that, and that means that over here my sap will become maple syrup at about 216.08 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for being here with me. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you're motivated to maybe tap some of your own trees.